So International Relations Minister Naledi Pandor is among some prominent ANC members who will not be returning to Parliament when it sits this Friday. It follows the governing party's 17 percentage point drop in the May elections. Pandor has been at the forefront of South Africa's International Court of Justice case against Israel in its conflict against Hamas. Will the minister's departure affect the country's foreign policy? Let's now unpack this with policy analyst Peter Fabricius, who's joining us this morning. Peter, very good morning to you. Thank you so much for making time for us. So the country's foreign policy is, of course, informed by the governing party, and essentially then it becomes a foreign policy that is also influenced by what MPs and members of parliament would have said in what that foreign policy then becomes. But can we really say that Minister Naledi Pandor carries so much power and influence that her departure would mean a change in policy or affect policy perhaps? Yes, there's a conversation to be had about the individual's acumen and being able to be and carry that title of being the chief diplomat. But does it really change policy?
Yeah, look, I mean, to some degree, obviously that question is dependent on what kind of coalition or joint government emerges from the talks. But it doesn't look like there would be a major change. I say that because, okay, at the moment, as far as I know, it's still not quite clear whether the ANC is going to go left or right, if you want to put it like that, although our politics are quite strange and hard to sort of put on a spectrum. But you have on the one side EFF and MK, which doesn't seem to be part of the picture at all, but are very much behind the whole sort of Palestine, Gaza initiative at the ICJ. On the other side, you have the DA, which I think is probably a more likely partner, plus with the IFP, who are not as enthusiastic, but they have said that they're not, they wouldn't block it. They've said, the DA has said that they themselves would not have taken Israel to the International Court of Justice, but since the case is there, they're not going to withdraw it. So, yeah, I mean, you might have less enthusiasm and you may have perhaps less persistent, well, I don't know, that might, let's just say that you might have less persistence. I mean, South Africa's gone to the court 4 or 5 times already in the space of a few months on that case, and maybe depending on what sort of government emerges from the negotiations, you wouldn't have quite the same degree of commitment and enthusiasm. But the case is there. It's got its own momentum to a degree. It would continue.
How important then is foreign policy to the government of the day, whether it is a government of national unity or a government that has won the outright majority? How important is that? And when we speak about the negotiations that are currently underway, some say that essentially this is a coalition talks that are underway because some political parties are coming forward with their own proposals as well. How then do we understand the function of a foreign policy and whether or not the ANC would want to give that up?
Yeah, look, foreign policy, you could say generally, not just in these circumstances, it takes a bit of a backseat to domestic policy for obvious reasons. I mean, issues on the table here like, minimum wage and national, health insurance and so on, obviously tend to take precedence. Now, the Gaza issue was seen by some analysts as something of an exception because it's something that the ANC just invested a lot of political capital into, and so before the election, for example, you would see like stop, the genocide, hashtag stop the genocide, big banners like that on rallies that the ANC was holding, and they thought it would make a difference in the election, their position, which DA says not so much. Down here in the Western Cape, where there's quite a big Muslim community, it might have had some impact, but not a huge amount. So, but I think that the ANC would probably make it a deal breaker not to have to drop the case. But as I said, that doesn't look like it's going to happen.
Yeah.
And then Russia, Ukraine is the other issue, which is harder to get the measure of. South Africa's sort of toned down its position a bit. It's participating to a degree in these talks, President Zelensky's peace framework talks. has been doing since the beginning. Ramaphosa is not going to be attending the big summit that they're holding in Switzerland this weekend.
Yeah.
But, I don't know, the Russians have been pushing them, countries like South Africa and other BRICS countries and so on, not to attend. But Ramaphosa, you could put it like this, has got a good excuse because he's got to stay at home to sort out the coalition.
Yep. Actually, there was a briefing yesterday that I attended with various ambassadors from coming from various countries who are ambassadors here in South Africa. The ambassador of Switzerland was part of the conversation,
Yes.
as well as the ambassador of Ukraine. And this is, of course, towards the peace summit that will be taking place in Switzerland. And what they said there is the intention behind that summit was to have it at a very high level. So you have your heads of state that would attend. But now we know that Sidney Mufamadi, who is the president's security advisor, as well as the DG Dengo, will be attending that summit. What does it mean, though, for the influence that South Africa is still able to make at an international level, considering that the political party that had the outright majority before that made some of these decisions is not as powerful?
Yeah, again, I think it depends on the shape of the coalition. By the way, I was also at that meeting, though you didn't see me because I was there by phone.
Okay.
They very kindly switched on their cell phone.
Yeah.
And I wrote a story about it, actually. It's in the Maverick today. Yeah, I think you would probably find if the ANC went into a coalition with the DA, that could be contentious. You can imagine that there'd be certain episodes and incidents like joint military exercises and so on, where there'd be arguments in inside the government and cabinet about issues like that. One could perhaps deduce that the government would sort of somewhat tone down its Russian position, if that would happen. A lot of things we would have to leave to the outcome of the negotiations. Because who would be the defense minister, for example? I would imagine the defense minister probably would be, if there's a joint cabinet, and that's also not clear, would probably be ANC, and so that might have an impact on whether the defense minister attends certain events in Moscow and so on. But I can imagine it's possible that they would dilute their kind of slightly pro-Russia policy a bit.
Yeah. Does a DA ANC alliance going into this government of national unity also mean a more friendlier relationship between Washington and Pretoria?
Yeah. Well, the DA is saying that it has got these good relations with the US and the West more generally, and then that would be helpful in getting over any obstacles that might arise, like the ones we saw last year, about AGOA and so on. And I guess that might be true. Look, there's a lot of resentment in the ANC at the DA, just simply because they think the DA regards like the US and the West as being the only powers in the world that count. But still, if they can get over that problem at the negotiation stage, and the DAs, and that would certainly help to smooth relations with US. And there's something that our future participation in AGOA is still up for discussion. It's because AGOA has to be renewed next year when it expires, and there had been some moves in Congress, as you know, to give us to kick us out, basically.
Yeah,
and it's still a possibility. I think some of that momentum is lost, but because they're going into elections this year as well. But it's still a potential threat.
Yeah, and an alliance with the EFF, maybe Mkhonto we sees a political party, if that is possible at all. Would that mean a continuation of the current foreign policy?
Yeah, it would, and I guess you could imagine. I don't know whether the ANC would want to go any further down that track, but in principle, if you did the math kind of thing, it could push them further towards Russia and further towards other countries on that kind of end of the political spectrum globally. But I think the ANC has itself put some brakes on those tendencies within its own party, because it realizes that it needs the West for economic reasons, even if they don't like them very much.
Yeah. Peter, thank you so much for making time for us. Really appreciate that. Also considering that Emma Powell, who is the Democratic Alliance's foreign affairs spokesperson there, saying that they would want the embassy in Tel Aviv to be reopened. It's an interesting one. And also remember on the other end, the proposal that was made by the EFF in Parliament for the entire shutdown of the Israeli embassy, which then was taken to Cabinet, and Cabinet hasn't yet taken a decision on that. But thank you so much for making time for us. Peter Fabricius, their foreign policy analyst, speaking to us about what these current negotiations mean, considering the foreign policy of the country.